Everything is sacrifice. You just have to pray you don't sacrifice the wrong thing.
I think Ṣọpẹ Dìrísù's lead performance is probably my favorite lead performance that I've watched of any movie this year. We're talking about My Father's Shadow, a 2025 Nigerian-British film that follows two young brothers exploring Lagos with their estranged father against the backdrop of the June 1993 Nigerian election crisis.
Des, why are we talking about My Father's Shadow today?
Because I am Nigerian and this is the first Nigerian movie to be in the official selection at Cannes. I had a very profound experience watching it the first time.
So I first heard about it when you were at Cannes, and I remember you said that you had a really elevated experience watching it. Since then, I've seen it coming up in a lot of cinephiles that I follow. They're very excited for it at various film festivals, and it's generally been getting good reviews. So yeah, I was really interested to watch it.
So I stumbled upon it right before I was going to Cannes, and then when I got to Cannes, I watched it there as a priority. I got to meet a lot of the production team that worked on it. If you know how Lagos works, everybody in Lagos is just 1 degree removed from each other, and a lot of this film was produced in Lagos. For full disclosure, I am very, very, very closely entangled with the messaging of this film, but all my opinions on it are still based on my response as a critical viewer the first time I watched it and all the times I've watched it subsequently.
So was My Father's Shadow good, bad, or mid?
I mean, possibly biased, but it was good. What about you? What do you think? I'm so interested because I don't know anything about your opinion of this movie. So don't hold back. Let me know how you feel. I will not be offended. Let's go. What did you think? Was My Father's Shadow good, bad, or mid?
I thought it was a good indie movie. I enjoyed it. I think the cinematography is really the winner for me. And there were elements of it that brought me back to my experiences as a young child going to Jamaica and visiting my family. And even to an extent, some of the conversations I've had with my dad. So I would say overall it's good. There were certain things I didn't like, but we'll get into those. Overall, I did enjoy it. And I'd watch it again, easily.
I completely agree with you. To me, there's many different things about this film that give it its selling points. Some of them technical, some of them artistic, some of them there's just like my own emotional reaction to it. But I think the singular most stunning and striking thing about this movie is the cinematography. I watched many different films from many different countries in Cannes, and this was the best cinematography of any film I watched across the world. And I'm not saying this because I'm Nigerian. I just thought already it's easily the best cinematography of any Nigerian film I've ever watched, full stop, in my life. But I honestly feel like his cinematography was better than probably almost anything I've watched this year. But then again, this year's offering has not been the best. So that's not really saying that much. But I thought it was so striking. As a person that is obsessed with nostalgia, some of my favorite films are films that can convincingly transport me. And often the way they do it is through cinematography. The reason I think Call Me By Your Name is such a masterpiece is because I feel like I'm walking around in a small town in Italy in the 1980s when I watched that film. And I wasn't born when any of the events of this film happened, but I literally felt like I was remembering my own memories when I was watching the film in a way that was kind of discombobulating, but very stirring in that it could trigger memories I don't have. And that was accomplished by the haunting cinematography. So I can't praise the cinematography enough. I have some notes about how the film delivered its final act, and I have some notes about women in this film.
Yep.
But I continue to be struck by how beautiful this film is.
Literally. I will say, I thought that maybe the first 30 minutes of the film were a tiny bit meandering. Having said that, what made up for it was the continuously beautiful cinematography. I actually think the second half of the movie isn't as beautiful, but listen, I have some biases to concede and to admit as well. I'm a country bumpkin at my heart. I love being in the countryside. I love rural life. And there was something about the color grading of the first half. There's a love for a humble life. And it was just transporting me back to the Caribbean, and so much of that was just so relatable to me.
So the director of the film is Akinola Davies Jr. He's a Nigerian British filmmaker who has been working on short films and music videos, but this is his first feature-length film. The writer of the film is his brother Wale Davies, who is a multi-hyphenate in Nigeria. He is known to many as one half of a rap duo called Show Them Camp under the name Tech. He's also Thames's manager, the musician Thames. He's her manager. And he does many different things in Nigeria. And he's like a poet, he's a writer, he's a musician. He's a very multi-talented person in a way that I know many people like that in Nigeria, but I've always felt that unfortunately their skills are not properly elevated to the right platforms. So I find it so cool that he wrote this script and it ultimately got to the heights it did. His brother Akin was 2 years old when their dad died, and Wale was 4 or 5 when their dad died. So Akin doesn't have any memories of their dad. Wale has some fleeting memories of their dad. But when they talk about this film, Akin in particular talks about how what he would consider memories of his dad is built from what people have told him about his dad. Also, he's named after his father, and how he has built this model of who his father could have been from other people's stories and some imagined memories that maybe he never actually had. And this whole movie was the two of them unpacking and processing that grief that they had never really processed, because how can you even grieve someone you didn't really properly get to know? If you know how masculinity works in Nigeria, you know how men are supposed to, quote unquote, supposed to conduct themselves in Nigeria. There's a level of gentleness to it, to how this film was made and how I hear them talk about it and how the film comes across when you watch it, that is genuinely so transgressive to me as a West African. I also want to note the fact that 2 people playing the little boys in the film are real life brothers, and they were street cast out of nowhere. There's just everything about the movie is personal. Let's talk about parenthood and fatherhood.
So first of all, I did enjoy the depiction of fatherhood, and like you said, I was thinking to myself, have I seen such a gentle presentation of Black fatherhood this year or even in the past few years? And I don't think so. Having said
Moonlight.
that, so that's the thing. This movie reminded me of Moonlight a lot, especially the scene where Mashallah Ali is in the ocean. In fact, one of those scenes felt like it was deliberately lifted from Moonlight. I did get the vibe that it was over-romanticized though. Even though the movie does critique the father in some ways. So for example, we do see towards the end where the father, you know, is potentially, let's say he's having an affair or something like that.
Potentially.
Yeah, well, I don't think the movie properly critiqued him. I did get the vibe that this wasn't a real father. This was a ghost, almost. Like this was a romanticization, basically.
Wait. Before we proceed, you just said something very important. And I even wanted to follow up on that from when you said you would like to watch it again. Because I strongly recommend to people that they watch this movie more than once. That thing you just said, you got the vibe that he was a ghost. What do you think is actually happening in this movie?
Well, that's the thing, because I think the ending is very rushed. We have the recurring theme of the father having these flashbacks about what's happened to him in some sort of military abusive situation. And then we just suddenly see the funeral. And it was giving me vibes that it felt like a dream almost. What did you think?
When I first watched it as well, I found the ending too jarring. And I was very discombobulated by it. And also, just for my own personal taste in filmmaking, I found it actually too sentimental at the very end. Like, I thought the tears and the burial went on a bit too long. Just my own personal taste. I'm not a very super weepy person. I like the tears to be gotten out of me with like just a flash of devastation, whereas I felt like that was extremely intense. But overall, the feelings of nostalgia and longing and yearning and disappointment that the film had emotionally taken me through was enough to still make me feel very emotionally moved by the entire viewing experience, despite my concerns with the very ending. With time, as I have reflected on what does this movie actually mean and I've reflected on the ending and actually how this ending loops to the beginning of this film. And as I've rewatched it over and over and over again, I have watched this movie like 5 times, and I've spoken to different people after they have watched it. I am not joking when I tell you my interpretation of what is going on in this film has significantly changed like 3 separate times. When I first watched it, I was like, this is a very weird, dreamy movie. And by the end, I was like, okay, did he die on the way back home? Because all the issues with the annulment were still happening. The second time I watched it, after I spoke to my cousin, she told me that, have you ever heard of Akudaya before? Akudaya is a Yoruba mythology about wraiths. After someone dies, they appear, they continue with their life, sometimes in a different place, sometimes to fulfill things that they didn't fulfill while they were alive. And when she said that, my mind kind of blew. And I was like, oh, he was dead the whole time. And there are hints throughout the film. There's stuff like the old man who sings to him in the amusement park saying, tell my wife when you see her. There's stuff like the soldier insisting over and over and over again that I've seen you before. I saw you at Bonny Camp. And throughout the movie, in the newspapers, they had been showing you that there was a massacre at Bonny Camp and the military denied the deaths. And his fellow policeman says, there is no way, that's not possible. Nobody survived. There's also the fact that when they see their aunt in a restaurant or something, she is truly shocked to see him. She's truly shocked to see Fola, the father. She cannot believe what she's looking at. And she says, let's not speak in front of the boys. And they have this hushed conversation away from the boys, and you're left to imagine what they're talking about. And after I thought about this and many, many other things, I was like, oh, this man, he died in Bonny Camp 2 weeks ago. And he came back to tie up loose strings with his family, especially with his boys, and to make sure that we're okay. And that's why he kept on insisting, I have to go and get my wages. I have to get my money. I have to make sure you understand you need to take care of your brother. But then I watched it again recently, and then I had the interpretation you just had, that this is literally a dream. Remy is dreaming. Their dad has died. It is the night before the burial. And he has a dream, imagining what that perfect day could have been, traveling to Lagos with his dad that he never got to experience with his brother. And that's why it literally feels so dreamy and incoherent. That's why his mom's presence is fading in and out. The movie literally opens and closes with Remy saying the words, Father, I will see you in dreams. So there's many different ways you can look at it. And my opinion on it keeps evolving each time I rewatch it. And when I speak to different people, it also adjusts my opinion. There is an objective truth to what is going on in the movie. And I know this because I've heard when the director and the writer talk about it. And I think that is very important, because I hate it when filmmakers make a movie and they don't actually have an objective truth and they're just leaving it purely up to interpretation. They don't need to tell us what their objective truth is, but I want to feel like the story has a specific intention for what it's telling you, and then it's leaving it up to you to speculate. On the subject of you saying that the film kind of glorifies Fola, or what was the exact wording you used?
Romanticize.
It romanticizes him. I agree it does, but I think that's the point.
The point, yeah.
I think Fola is representing a metaphor for this idealization that a lot of Nigerians and a lot of West Africans, a lot of Africans, and a lot of people that come from colonized countries have of this leader that is going to save them. Or this idealistic concept of what this perfect nation could be if only A, B, C, D happened. When in reality, it's never as simple as that. When in reality, people will disappoint you. When in reality, the nation state will disappoint you, because by design, it is flawed. The way the camera follows this film from the perspective of the boys a lot of the time. So you're quite literally almost looking up at their father in many shots. He's supposed to be a bit larger than life. He's supposed to be this imposing, overly charismatic figure, this what he says is law kind of figure. And as a Nigerian, I know what it's like to have those kind of dads around. The ones that once daddy is home, everybody is quiet, everybody comes, everybody goes back into the house. You have to be on your best behavior. When he does come back home, but you don't actually get that much time to him. So you don't actually have that much personal closeness with him, but you dream up this idea of him because he's almost an object of law in your head and in your household. But as you get older, that idealized concept gets all sorts of cracks into it. And you just realize, yeah, he's just figuring this shit out just like all the rest of us. And it really hit home for me, and it hit home for many, many Nigerians I've spoken to.
I agree with everything you're saying. And by the way, this movie did speak to me personally because I don't know, I go backwards and forwards about my relationship with my dad a lot. On the one hand, when I speak to other people from, especially people from black cultures, about the various things my dad used to do for me, especially as a young child, like when I tell my black female friends in particular that my dad used to do my hair, people are always just like, what? You had a black father doing your hair? But on the other
That's so
hand,
shocking to me.
and that's crazy to me, that is shocking to you, but that was my
My
life.
dad
But on
has
the
never
other hand,
my dad has never touched my hair in my life.
and this is what I mean, like, on the one hand, I can see the positives that he's able to let go of some of the maybe toxic masculinity that would tell him that you shouldn't be doing your daughter's hair. But on the other hand, as I got older, like you just mentioned, our relationship became very, very strained. And I think it's because he just couldn't cope with the fact that I'm no longer the young child that you can tell me to go and sit over there and I'm going to go do it. And I did enjoy seeing the children question their father about, okay, well, you're around, but you're not really around, basically. But what I didn't like was the fact that I don't feel that this movie ever held him to account. I don't think it was interested in holding him to account. And what made that particularly jarring for me is the fact that, first of all, this is a very masculine movie, which is fine. As you mentioned, we've both seen Moonlight, we both enjoyed Moonlight. Moonlight's also a very masculine movie, but women still speak, women still have a role. Whereas with this movie, I think women spoke for a total of 1 minute or something like that. We never hear anything from the mom's perspective. It feels like this movie took the mom's sacrifices for granted. Now that makes sense because we live in a world where a woman's sacrifices are taken for granted. But it just jarred me so much that we never hear anything from her side. We hear things about her making various sacrifices to keep this family afloat. So she moves to the village to go and be with Fola. She's working multiple jobs as per the son. The youngest son tells us that she's miserable all the time because the father's at work. Now, obviously, potentially that could be because he's actually passed. We do hear a few things from women, but I think the other thing I didn't like is the fact that we're dealing with a scenario where there's extreme political violence. And there's no world in which political violence impacts men only. In fact, they have their own issues when it comes to political violence. So basically, long story short, this movie was extremely masculine, which isn't the problem because we've seen Moonlight do it well. But the fact that women basically had no relevance and no voice in this movie was a big problem for me towards the end.
For me, it was more almost like such a lost opportunity because I think the actress that was cast to play their mom, Bola, her name is Winnie Efon. The few moments, those glimpses of moments that we did see her, I thought she was expressing so much emotion without speaking that I was like, I want to see more of her performance. So for me, it was even just like my specific reaction when I first watched it is this is all very Christopher Nolan-esque. Is she there? Is she not there? Is she dead? Is she like what's going on? Wife figure. That's it. He loves it. And a lot of other auteur filmmakers love it as well. So it was interesting seeing it in the Nigerian point of view. Does My Father's Shadow pass the Bechdel test? I don't believe it does. I don't believe we see the female named characters, Abike, Auntie Sheyi, and Bola, speaking to each other directly, having conversations that don't have to do with Bola or Iman. I think the Abike character is one I have thought about continuously since I watched this film. So Abike is the waitress in the bar at the end where I wouldn't even say implied, he clearly has a relationship with her. The character she's playing of essentially a side chick is a known trope. But and yet in the 4 or 5 minutes we see her, the actress who played her, Uzomaka Power, I was so interested by her acting choices and how she performed that character. Once again, I wanted to see more. Like when you first see her, she brings like the drinks to the guys and the boys at the table, or she comes to take their order. And she's first of all stunned to see Fola. So that's again a very important sign in how you interpret this movie. Everybody's shocked whenever they see him is a clue to what's really going on. But even like she is genuinely like taken aback by the boys. And the more I've thought about it, and when I've spoken to other women, they said she doesn't know that he has a family.
Yeah,
she doesn't know.
I think that's the obvious reading, yeah.
I didn't clock it initially. I just thought
Really?
she was a side chick that didn't give a damn because that's very normal in Lagos. So
it makes
she
perfect
didn't know.
sense.
So him just popping up in the bar with his two boys, knowing she could be there, he's messing with her head. Like he's like, what the hell? Bear in mind also when you add the element that he maybe died a week or two ago and she's maybe been mourning him or being worried about him. She actually says it to him in that moment where Remy sees them speaking, that I was so scared when they said you didn't come in at work or nobody heard from you. I was worried. And I don't know, I was very fascinated by her performance, especially because if you know a lot about the history of Nigerian films and Nollywood, there is this over the top wife versus side chick performance style that happens in a lot of Nollywood films. And I thought she gave it a lot of dimensionality in just those few minutes she was on screen that I was just very fascinated. I thought all the female performers in this movie were really interesting in the small time they had. And they stayed in my mind a lot. And I would have loved if we had even more time with them. However, and you know I'm not a person that defends men or centers men. I know why this movie's runtime is all about two boys and their dad. I know the whole movie is a processing of grief of two real life brothers of their real life dad. That is what the film is. Now, you and I would say that very sophisticated filmmaking means you can do that and also make sure you feature women with the level of depth, involvement, participation that is warranted. However, I give this movie passes that maybe I shouldn't, because I genuinely was quite stirred by the dynamic it was showing between men in a way I am very rarely stirred in cinema, whether Nigerian, whether African, whether anywhere else in the world.
I think I understand where you're coming from. I think it just ties into the way how, you know, the phrase where people say society punishes the parent who stayed. Now, of course, in this scenario, we're not accusing Fola of being an absentee parent necessarily. Potentially may have passed away. But I think you can do a movie talking about two brothers and their grief for their father while acknowledging the one woman who this movie even concedes that she is the one that kept this whole family alive. And while I was just watching this play out, all I could think was there's a woman who doesn't know where her children are, potentially. She doesn't know where her children are. She's been working all day. She's working her ass off. She's crying at night because her partner, probably she even knows about the affair if you assume that this is a real life story or like a real story and not a dream. And the movie is not even giving her any sort of acknowledgement almost. I don't think it had to be this way where women, literally, I think women probably spoke for all of 2 minutes. That's it. In the whole movie.
No, stop it, D, stop it. There's also
I'm being very
Shay.
serious.
There's also Auntie Shay that sees them in the bar. She has a whole conversation with both him and the boys. And there's all the various food vendor women who are flirting with Fola.
And in fact, let's speak about that very quickly as well, because there was a scene where they were on the bus leaving the village to go to Lagos, and they zoom in on a woman's chin hair at one point. And little stuff like that, I was just like, I don't know that I like the way how gender's being handled here. But I do understand that ultimately this is naturally a masculine movie. But because I have references like Moonlight, which again, you can say, as you've mentioned, it's a different level of filmmaking maybe. But because I've seen it done so well before, I think it just didn't land very well for me. But that doesn't take away from the fact that I enjoyed the movie.
I also kept on thinking that when am I going to see the equivalent of this for like specifically Black women's relationships with their mothers? Because I feel like when you see stories about motherhood, many times it's either like about some sociopath serial killer guy that hates his mom and how that drove him to becoming a serial killer, some Bates Motel psycho kind of stuff. Or it's all about like this divine grace mother, glory, perfect figure that protects her children through the worst that happens to them, and she's just sacrificing herself over and over and over for them, and the children just like love her purely and all of that. And as a person who has a very complex relationship with my own mother, and I have many female friends who also have complex relationships with their mothers. I'm like, when do we get to see that story
Like,
of, like, to be very honest, girls that love their mothers but don't necessarily always like them? And not in a
yeah.
misogynistic way, but in a real life, what mothers end up inadvertently doing to their daughters because of trauma that they haven't healed from. Now, there are stories like this that exist, but do they really exist for, like, black women properly? Like, Precious, I guess. But Precious is also doing trauma porn, and it's
Yeah.
also commenting on class in a particular way. It's not really, in my opinion, fully delving into the emotional. Also, that is almost like a cartoonishly evil mother
Yes.
figure.
It's the reverse of this, actually.
Yeah, like, I'm very interested to see those stories for black women, for African women, for Caribbean women. I'm looking forward to when we get to see them more.
But we know why it doesn't exist, because black women don't get the same grace as black men. We don't get the same grace.
I wanted to talk about the concept of sacrifice, because that was another thing that hit me really, really hard when I first watched it. Is that there's a line that Fola says that in life everything is sacrifice. You just have to pray you don't make the wrong one. And as a person that has just spent this last year of my life throwing away rational decision making or responsible quote unquote decision making and taking leaps of faith and leaps of hope, basically, knowing that there's stuff I'm giving up by making those risks, and just praying and hoping that those sacrifices and those risks are worth it. It really, like, there were certain things they would say in this movie that would just casually devastate me, and that was one of them. That line, when I heard it, I was like, oh, like, I was like, oh my god. It actually, like, kind of knocks the wind out of me. There was also another moment, I think, where Fola says Nigeria is hard, and he just says it. I've spoken to so many Nigerians about this film, and they all say a very eerie thing about watching this movie is that even though it's set 30 years in the past, every single thing that all of the characters are saying, we all still say it right now. And so much of the imagery after the annulment day is so reminiscent to them of what happened on October 20th, 2020 in Lagos. And how disturbing it is to hear these characters having all this hope that gets deflated, but constantly referencing the fact that hopefully it will be better in their children's generation, and we are living in their children's generation and it isn't. I've spoken to a lot of people who said that seeing this film helped them understand why our parents' generation kind of gave up. We get so frustrated with them that why won't you guys sit up and do something? Like, why have you allowed things get like this? Or why don't you understand why we are so agitated about the state of the country? And it's like, because they were agitated, and they got all the hope knocked out of them, and it literally traumatized them, and they are kind of like completely burnt into a husk of cynicism and disillusionment. And it's just been very interesting reflecting on the story in that way. Like I said, I watched this movie and it's covering events that I wasn't born yet for, and yet I felt like I was remembering them. It's a very, very particular feeling to experience as a West African. I've never really experienced it before in my life watching the film.
So, admittedly, I'm not very educated on what happened with regards to the election in 1993. But what I did find interesting is, obviously, you very kindly basically gave me a whistle-stop tour of Lagos a couple years ago. And what I found so interesting watching it, especially when I realized this was about a past event, was the fact that some of the issues that were going on back then are still very much relevant today. So whether that's having issues with accessing oil. What I found interesting about that is I could see in this movie that this is someone who probably loves Nigeria a lot and loves Lagos a lot. I think this movie did a great job of really introducing, like, I almost feel like Lagos is a character in this movie. Even if I hadn't been before, I feel like this movie would have really transported me to it. But as someone who's been there before, I felt like I was right back there in the chaos and in the bustle of it. there's a love for the country, there's a love for the city, but there's like a real resentment for the fact that there are issues and that they are not being solved. And
100%.
as someone who's a diasporan, I could literally feel the diaspora energy in this. And I felt the same way about going to the Caribbean, where it's like, I come from such a wonderful, beautiful country. I love it so much. But there are certain crucial issues that mean that I can't fully engross myself in it. And I think the director did do a good job of translating that.
I always say to people, to be a diasporan that regularly goes back home, like I have the privilege of doing. I mean, I don't really consider myself a diasporan, but a person who lives in the diaspora but frequently goes back home, is to have an almost borderline fetishistic relationship with your home city. Because of whatever issues you are dealing with in the diaspora and that missing of home and longing for home, you cannot help yourself, no matter how much you understand all the issues back at home, from starting to paint a rosy picture of back home, because you miss the things you love about it so much when you're away. In a way, the people that actually live there all the time don't necessarily feel that way about it. In fact, many of them are trying to flee. And then when you do go back, partly because of the privileges you have as you're navigating it as an almost outsider, you get to enjoy the beauty of it and the wonders of it in a way that a lot of people that this is their day in, day out don't even get to experience. And you see that in the boys and Fola. The boys, this is their first time in Lagos to get to properly see Lagos, and they're being taken on a tour of it, and it's all wonders and ooh, ah, and it's like just like a fantasy day for them. But to their dad, Lagos represents the hustle, the struggle, begging to get his money for his hard-earned work, grief, loss, his friends, and maybe himself that literally died there fighting, people hustling him for money, him trying to get across town with not enough money to spend, petrol issues. And so I even think there's even something there about that push and pull between what it is to love Lagos or what it is to love your home city, like you said when you were describing the Caribbean, and what it is to actually live through it. And how there's always a grass is greener thing going on in how we talk about this stuff. It is the most beautiful depiction of Lagos I've ever seen on screen, full stop.
But I do think there was a missed opportunity though. So one thing that surprised me in this movie was the lack of Nigerian music.
Oh,
I was very, very surprised by that because I did a bit of digging because I was like, but I know there was a lot of interesting stuff going on with Nigerian music at the time. So from what I understand, Fela Kuti's Piece of No Nation came out a couple of years before the timeline for this movie. And I was like, that's such a missed opportunity. Now, of course, there could be licensing issues around music and stuff like that. But you can still maybe create other forms of music, maybe engage local people. I just think those scenes where we're getting introduced to Nigeria, and more importantly, Lagos, I would say, it felt too quiet for me. As someone who's been there before, I was like, this is not right. If someone were to try and make a movie about Jamaica and I'm not hearing music, I know there's immediately something wrong. So that was something that stood out for me.
That is so interesting that you have that reaction, because I understand your critique so much, and yet I felt almost the exact opposite reaction.
Interesting.
I felt such glee for the score and the quietness of this movie. It's one of my favorite things about it, and it's one of the things that made me enter a dreamlike state as I was watching it. And I think if there was properly recognizable music playing in it, it would have taken me out of it. Now you are correct that to be in Lagos and to experience Lagosness is to be surrounded with a barrage of loud, boisterous music, and pop, and Nigerian and African and diaspora pop culture is full of Nigerian music. Beast of No Nation is a very important song for the 90s in Nigeria, as is other Fela song. Interestingly, Fela specifically had a problem with MKO Abiola, the man that is represented as a hero in this movie. Fela dedicated a whole song to him called International Thief Thief. So he was quite critical of him the way he was critical of pretty much every single man in power. There is Nigerian music playing throughout this film. The score of the film many times has like choral hums of old Nigerian songs, including one of my absolute favorite things about this film and one of my favorite musical moments in film, full stop, in the last 5 to 10 years, which is the Lejado sisters, who were a Nigerian feminist girl group, I believe in the 70s or 80s. They have a song called Orin Arrow, and that song makes up a significant part of the score in this film, but is hummed. And it's an old Yoruba song about loss and grief. And in the scene where they're in the amusement park, of which some of those shots in the amusement park are some of my favorite shots of this film, you're hearing it being hummed in the background. That is Ori Arrow by the Lejado sisters, but it has been turned into a score rather than playing the straightforward song. Because again, you're supposed to feel like you are in a dream. Like, if you think about the dreams you have, do you hear strong, clear starts to ends of songs and the proper lyrics and the proper percussion? I don't, anyway. Another interesting quirk to the music of this film is a very pivotal scene to me in how you interpret what is actually going on in this film is that conversation that Fola has with Baba at the amusement park when he tells him about how his wife had died, and it's only upon her loss that he realized how much she was doing for him, which there's a lot to unpack there, and how he wants Fola to tell her for him, which is how, to me, that's how you know that Fola is dead, and he knows he's dead. After he says that, he sings Onriaro, which is the same Lejado song's sister song that is forming the score, and it is a grief song. Setting the concept that mourning is running through this film, mourning of the concept of the nation that never was, mourning of this father figure that you never got to know. And to me, it really works sentimentally. There's an additional layer, which is that the actor that plays Baba, Ayo Lejado, is the brother of the Lejado sisters, and one of his sisters had died right before they made the film. So, like, I'm just too personally invested in this film. That's part of the problem, really. But like, the restrained take on Nigerian music, it does actually really work for me in this case. And at the end of the film, when the credits roll, Ori Arrow starts playing again. And when that moment happened in the theater, I burst into tears. And this is the only time you hear the proper song with the actual original vocals from the Lejado sisters. And I burst into tears when that happened in the cinema. So I love how this film handles music. But I also understand your critique. The movie that would do that is a different type of movie, which could also be a great movie, but it's a different type of movie. This film addresses politics, but it's intentionally also not addressing it too head on. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I think one of the things I struggled with this movie is I wasn't sure whether this is a movie that's really about critiquing what was going on in Nigeria at the time, or whether this was a movie about fatherhood and family, I guess. At times it felt like it was two separate movies. I will say that I think the way how the military was depicted was very effective. Whenever the military was on screen, I immediately felt very, very tense. I just knew that there was problems on the way with them. But yeah, I think basically a lot of the conversation around fatherhood felt maybe a bit too condensed with that scene by the beachside. But it was still a very necessary conversation. I don't know. Maybe I felt like if I think I would have enjoyed it if some of that conversation was dispersed a little bit more towards the beginning of the movie.
Throughout the movie, even. I agree. I feel like there was a bit too much information dump, and not exposition per se, but like bearing your heart all at once in that moment. I do think there's some very important things happening in that conversation. When he's explaining to him how he used to see his dead brother after he died, and he didn't stop seeing him until he understood that the brother wanted someone to remember him. To me, that's important in how you interpret what's going on in this movie, because that's Fola telling Remy that's what he's here for, and that he needs him to understand that he needs to take care of his brother and they shouldn't forget him. And that supports the theory that this is all a dream. I mean, again, Remy starts this movie and ends this movie by saying, "Father, I will see you in dreams." Another very profound line for me there was when he said, "The memories that hurt you when you lose someone are what will give you comfort after." And I thought about the biggest grief I've experienced recently in my life, which is my grandma passing away about oh my God, it's 2 years now. And I'm still not over it. I still think about her every single day. And I still haven't fully processed the grief and the shock of how she died, even though she was she was almost a 90-year-old woman. It's still too raw for me to view any of my last couple of memories of her with positivity. But I do also understand that there will come a time that the fact that I even have those memories of her will be something that I treat with joy. But now it's still too difficult to like associate it with anything positive because I was so broken when she passed. And yeah, it just hits. I don't know, I don't know. This movie just really hits me hard emotionally. I don't know what to say. Do you think this movie is saying anything about colonialism?
I don't think it has much to say about colonialism, no. What do you think?
I agree, and I almost kind of like that. Now, colonialism is part of the original sin of a lot of African countries' political issues because these a lot of them are countries that shouldn't really be because they were drawn together by a bunch of people who had no understanding or investment in what the people who actually lived within these lines they were drawing were like. However, I'm also not a fan of pretending that there aren't absolutely vile men in a lot of our countries who continue to perpetuate all of the problems that we have. And I feel like there has been so much great art made about colonialism's impact on us that I kind of enjoyed having this more insular, if you know, kind of unpacking of the failures of men that seem larger than life within the specificities of Nigerian culture or Lagos culture or African political culture.
I think it's interesting because the colonialism discussion is so tricky because on the one hand, the reason why Nigeria exists and a lot of issues are there, especially when it becomes to inter-tribe issues, are because of colonialism. It's too big a country. It's not the only one that suffers from this. Remember, a lot of the African countries didn't draw their own borders. So when you draw false borders around different people, different ways of life, religion and culture, and expect them to get along as one, it doesn't end well. And this is the same for Europe. It's just that it happened for them in the past. Having said that, I believe strongly that as Black people, we need to stop looking to white people to solve our problems. And so I do think that as time goes on, we can still critique colonialism and we can still critique Western nations for what they did. But when it comes to a solution-based point of view, you need to understand Western nations are never going to come up with a solution that actually works for you. So I do agree that I think as we move forward, media that's focused on solutions for Black people and Black countries need to be more insular. What I liked about this movie, especially, I'll admit, I'm so biased. I really loved that first maybe 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes in the countryside. As someone who grew up around many Nigerian people, one of the realities is that you get very exposed to the big cities. So I've heard a lot about Lagos. Obviously, I've met you. I visited Lagos. What I really enjoyed, though, was getting to see a rural depiction of Nigeria that wasn't this heavily stigmatized Western depiction of it. I was thinking, obviously, they're not millionaires, but they're living pretty comfortable. They have a nice house. The kids are well fed. They're well taken care of. But we do hear in the movies, I think somebody makes a comment along the lines of, how did you convince the city girl to move to the village? How did you manage this sort of thing? Whereas when I look at that sort of lifestyle, that's the lifestyle I aspire to. I think maybe there's a commentary about the way how in Nigeria, and it's not just Nigeria, in the Caribbean it's the same thing. There's this idea of the country bumpkin and it's associated with poverty and like it's a lowly way of living when actually, depending on who you are, it may just be for you.
Yeah, and I almost think the movie almost addresses that a bit in an exchange that happens between Fola and Aki, where Fola is like, the only reason I keep on living is because I have to go to the city to work for you. And it's like, but they don't even pay you. And all I thought about is some of my recent life experiences in the country that we met in, and how, so much of the discourse I get from lots of people is, oh, you just be there and, at least you're getting paid more of a salary and at least this is happening and that's happening. And I'm like, I don't have that. Like, if you know how UK economics works right now, certain kinds of young people that live in certain parts of the country, you work your ass off and you don't actually live with much to say about it. Yeah, you can say that, oh, you worked, you hustled, you moved to the city, you did this, you got a good degree, you did all of that, you got on all the graduate schemes. But do you actually have that much to show for it? If you then add up the mental health issues that you might be having at the same time, I almost view that as a bit of a critique of fetishizing the hustle too much, which if there's anybody that fetishizes the hustle, it's Lagos people.
Yeah, I got that message loud and clear from the father. But again, I wish if there was a tiny bit more dialogue on that front. Because it's an important conversation for black men to have in particular. That, yes, providing for your family is important. But at the end of the day, your children are children once. And once that opportunity is gone, it's gone.
D, what would you give My Father's Shadow out of 10?
I'd give it a 7 out of 10. I enjoyed it. I really love the cinematography, especially in those first 20 minutes. I did feel immersed in the movie. I felt immersed in Lagos. I felt immersed even in the rural parts of Nigeria in the beginning. I find it interesting that you really resonate with the grief elements. As someone who's been through a lot of grief, I'm not going to lie to you, I didn't really resonate with it as much. But maybe it's because I was missing some of those cultural context clues that you obviously know more about. The big problem for me in this movie, though, was the gender element. Like, I think in the first half, I was able to forgive it, but towards the second half, when I started hearing the son speaking on behalf of the mother, I just thought... And that scene in the beginning where they zoom in on the woman's chin hair, I think that set the tone for me as well. But yeah, overall, it was a good movie. I enjoyed it, and I'd watch it again. What about you?
I will say I give it a 7.5. There's sometimes I wake up because I think about this movie every day. And I think to me, like, this is an 8 out of 10, 8.5 movie. But let me say I'll give it a 7.5. To me, this is the best Nigerian film that has ever been made in my lifetime. To me, this is the most beautiful depiction of Lagos and maybe of West Africa that I've ever seen on screen, full stop, by anybody and any production. To me, this film triggers such an aggressive reaction out of me every single time I watch it in different ways. I've never watched it and not cried before. And that doesn't happen to me easily with film. So it is extremely noteworthy to me. I have a serious problem with the very last 10-15 minutes of this film. So I can't give it its 10s because of that. I, like you, also wish that the women were more like corporeal, basically, and less like wisps of themselves. I also feel like there's some parts of the dialogue that I wish were a bit more fluid, a bit slightly less explained, a bit slightly less exposition-y. But again, this movie hits me like an emotional ton of bricks every time I watch it. So it's a very strong film for me. Strong 7.5, maybe 8. I think Ṣọpẹ Dìrísù's lead performance is probably my favorite lead performance that I've watched of any movie this year. Because what he has to do in this character, he has to play this person who is larger than life and a figure everybody like is up, stares up at, but clearly someone that's kind of like collapsing under his own weight in a very particular way. And also, he kind of also has to be playing someone that might not actually be there. And I really did feel quite swept up in him. And because that lead performance, which is so critical for this film, works for me, the whole film works for me, despite my notes on everything else. I will note specifically on the concept of the gaze of this film. There's something about the gaze the camera has in this film that I really kept on thinking about it both the first time I watched it and all the subsequent times. Whether it's from the cinematographer's hands, the director's hands, or a combination of both. The way this film films Ṣọpẹ as Fola is so... I don't know if the word is loving. Like it has a gaze that it's almost like the camera is semi-worshipping him. It's not a perspective I'm used to seeing of male cinematographers and directors of male leading actors. I've seen it many times when you have these male directors who have a muse that is a woman, like how David Fincher filmed Rooney Mara, or how they filmed Ana de Armas in Blonde. But to see it done for not just like a male leading actor, but also like for an African story and an African leading character, there was something so fascinating and hypnotizing and again transgressive about that I really, really, really did find super interesting and super cool. And I'm still thinking about it every day. The Mariana Trench is 6,000 fathoms deep and the lowest depth man has reached inside the earth. How deep is my father's shadow?
I would say so. I'm just going based on the way how I interpreted the movie in the beginning. You've given me some additional context, but I have to be true to what I thought. I would say it was 3,000.
Okay. I would say I'd have thought something similar when I first watched it, but after my second rewatch, I will put it at a strong 5,500 fathoms deep. It's one of the deepest. Again, it feels like I am overpraising this movie, but it is one of the deepest movies I've ever watched in my life. In the sense that every single time I watch it, I feel like I get a new level of understanding of what it's actually trying to tell me, and it's not often that happens to me. So I think it is very, very thoroughly layered and very intentional in a way I really appreciate.
So the first comment from Ellis on Letterboxd says, Nigeria, the loudest crier of God's absentee children. He may send child support and come in sometimes for moments of magic, but he ain't there. And we're begging for more of him more than anyone else. What are your thoughts? Is it really that deep?
It is extremely deep. I think this is a really poetic way to summarize this movie, and it's a really poetic way to summarize how I feel like a lot of Nigerians have reacted to this movie in Nigeria. Like, I have nothing more to say except yes. Okay, so the last one I have for you is Anja on Letterboxd said, unfortunately, this was not time for me. I know you said that you did find some bits of it meandering. What do you think? Is
So
it really
first of
that
all, I
deep?
don't. It's not that deep. Um, it is a slow movie, but I think there's nothing inherently wrong with a slow movie. And although I did find that certain parts of the first, let's say, especially the first act, basically, I did find parts of it meandering. As I mentioned, it was made up for with the beautiful cinematography. I think if you're gonna have a slow movie, you need to give us something to hold on to, and I think this movie did do that. I do think it could have been a bit shorter, but overall, it's definitely not that deep to say that it was nap time. I was not bored like at all.
We got the chance to speak to the lead actors of the film, Ṣọpẹ Dìrísù, who plays Folarin, and Chibuike and Godwin Igbo, who play Remy and Akin at London Film Festival.
Same way when we saw Woman King, I hadn't seen a lens put on West Africa in that way. So, look, Nigerian film is already deep and broad, but I'm looking forward to it deepening and broadening.
I was to say like my favorite day on set should be amusement park, like that. Yeah, where we could go on different rides. We had the opportunity, like had the park to ourselves. Like there was no kids around. Like if you choose any ride you wanted to go to, and it was really fun. Like being on set. Like we went walking, we were just having fun. Yeah.
What about you?
For me, it's really the beach because I love swimming, waves. It's so challenging. Wave was also very hard, but I actually loved it.
And you guys are real life brothers. What was it like filming with each other?
It was nice swimming with my brother because like we're always together, like in the vacation van, always together, practice our lines together, and it really helped us a lot to perform. Because we are really brothers, we know each other very well.
Yeah.
We interact with each other. We know, yeah, know each other. It's easy.
And one final question: what was the hardest thing about filming this?
I think the shooting went well, but I think the hardest thing was having to go from this place to another, like having to control the waves, or like sometimes you have to stop traffic, like traffic to pass, you have to wait, and Nigerian production is quite hard.
Anything else?
Yeah, for me, just waking up every day is tiring.
I hear you. Well, I love the movie. You guys did my favorite part about the movie. Well done, and I'd love to see more from you in the future. Okay. Good luck. Which is why you preparing for that pivotal role in the scene where
Sure,
you're playing
I think with the boys, we obviously have the story of them and their father, and then them sort of missing out on the relationship with their father. We needed something that would draw like a parallel, and I think the story of Akinola and him never becoming president felt like a very good parallel, not only for tension, but because by losing Akinola, the nation responsibility, the nationhood of a potential father of a nation, I think the boys losing their father, it made the sort of perfect, had the perfect counterbalance.
Continually challenges you and offers you things that like
Nigeria like global for its films.
but also
What do you hope
the wealth of emotion that existed in that song is just like rawly displayed on camera. And
Do you know what I mean? Nigeria is known for its storytelling.